You know, if you're someone who looks at the world today, the economy, politics, even just the general vibe, and you feel like something is just fundamentally broken.
Deeply broken.
Yeah, structurally broken, then this deep dive is definitely for you. We're not looking at quick fixes today.
No, not at all.
Our sources are tackling a huge question. What is the absolute total scope of exploitation in our world? And more importantly, is there a progressive, real blueprint for ending it?
That's exactly it. And we're moving beyond the usual conversation, which is, almost always just about economics.
Right.
Today, we're diving into a really comprehensive, multi-layered critique of modern society. And we're using a unique philosophical lens to do it. It's called Proutism.
Dynamism, okay.
And this framework argues that to really get systemic justice, we have to look at how human potential is captured, not just in one way, but across three fundamental dimensions of our existence.
So our mission today is to unpack this idea, this proudest concept of the threefold exploitation, a tri-level system of control. And it operates on the physical, the intellectual, and even the spiritual spheres. We really want to illuminate the sheer scope of the crisis.
And not just to describe the problem, that's key.
No, not just to be depressing. It's to shine a light on the path toward a new, a vibrant, and a fundamentally just social structure. And this feels especially urgent now, in this age of AI and exponential tech change.
It is. The ethical grounding is more crucial than ever. The analysis we're looking at offers a profoundly optimistic and futuristic view.
Optimistic, I like that.
It is. It's grounded in the idea that if we can correctly diagnose the full problem, if we can admit that the global system is actively working to, neutralize the entire human being, then we can forge a powerful, collective, and holistic solution.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're looking at sources that say capitalist exploitation has these pervasive tentacles, and they're crushing the whole human existence.
A full spectrum.
It's a full spectrum analysis, and the core message seems really clear. If we only fight on one front, say, the economic front,
right,
we're basically guaranteeing failure. The system just adapts. It'll shift its method of control somewhere else.
That's the trap.
So where do we start? Section 1, then. Defining this whole crisis.
Well, the foundational principle, and this is really a strategic one, is that you can't fight what you can't see clearly.
Right. You have to map out the battlefield.
Exactly. To successfully fight exploitation, or shoshun, as it's called in the original source, we first have to get just absolute clarity on its methods, its reach.
It's like a doctor can't treat a disease without a proper diagnosis.
Precisely. And the diagnosis these sources give for humanity right now is it's pretty severe.
It sounds like it.
They suggest society is being ground down. That's the phrase used. Placed in a kind of death-like situation by capitalist exploitation. And it's not a local problem.
No, it's a vast net. That's the image they use.
A vast, comprehensive net. It stretches across the entire globe and this is the key part, it encompasses the full scope of our existence, the material, the mental, and our inner world.
Okay, so that comprehensive view, that's what leads to the core insight here.
Yes. The exploitation isn't unitary. It's not one single thing. It's not just about money, which is where most critiques stop.
Right.
Instead, it operates on three distinct but interconnected levels. And these are the three forms of capitalism that we have to understand and ultimately conquer to get to true universal justice.
Okay, let's lay them out. Let's be really clear. So number 1 is physical exploitation.
Right. That's one we all recognize.
It's the most obvious one. It deals with material control, wealth, economic power.
Traditional capitalism, you could say.
Then number 2 gets a bit more subtle, mental or intellectual exploitation.
Much more subtle. This is about the deliberate stagnation of thought. It's the control and the hoarding of knowledge and collective consciousness.
So it's about paralyzing people's ability to think critically, to even understand they have political power.
Exactly that. And then there's the third one.
Number 3, spiritual exploitation. This one, I think, is the most challenging for people to grasp.
It can be, but the sources argue it's the highest form of selfishness. It's the hoarding of spiritual power or self-knowledge.
So doing inner work, but only for yourself.
Only for personal gain, while completely ignoring the mandate to serve the world with that insight.
Okay, and here's the part that feels like a real paradigm shift. The philosophy says these 3 types are equally dangerous.
Equally dangerous. That is the crucial piece of analysis. It's not a hierarchy, like one is worse than the others. There are 3 coexisting pillars that hold up the entire system of control.
Wow. That really is the insight we have to hold on to, isn't it? Because most of us, when we talk about injustice, we are laser focused on the physical.
Absolutely. Wages, housing, poverty, resource distribution.
All critical issues. But if the mental and spiritual dimensions are equally potent threats, then just, I don't know, tweaking the tax code or reforming one industry is.
Woefully insufficient. It's like you said before, it's a diagnosis problem. You're polishing a broken gear while the wiring and the software are completely corrupted.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, without simultaneously addressing society's intellectual capacity, our ability to think clearly together, and the underlying moral or spiritual purpose that defines our common destiny, we just leave these gaping vulnerabilities.
And the system, being adaptive, will just shift its focus.
It will. If you block economic hoarding, it'll just morph into knowledge hoarding or spiritual complacency. You need a tri-level solution for a tri-level problem, a crisis that targets the whole human being.
So let's start that deep dive into the first layer, the physical shackles, the sphere of economic capitalism.
Let's do it.
The sources have a very specific diagnosis of the core economic flaw. It's not just, rich versus poor. It's about the structure of power itself.
Correct. The core constraint they identify is the immobility of economic power. The term is Artha Shakti.
Artha Shakti.
The analysis argues that this economic power becomes limited, unmoving, and critically held captive.
Captive. So the wealth is functionally paralyzed. It can't move.
Precisely. Think of the economy less like a pile of gold and more like a circulatory system. Economic power should be the blood flowing everywhere.
Okay.
But when it's held captive, bound up in, say, complex derivative markets, offshore accounts, opaque corporate structures controlled by a tiny few, it stops flowing.
And that creates scarcity and inequality elsewhere in the body.
It creates clots. It breathes the scarcity and deep inequality, preventing the life force of the economy from reaching the whole system. The sources really emphasize that dynamism is essential. When power is bound, society stagnates.
So the progressive mandate that flows from that is, it's pretty radical. It's not reform.
No, it's a complete structural overhaul. The source calls for completely discarding what it labels the current meaningless economic structure and building a wholly new one.
And the goal of this new structure has to be what you call dynamism.
Dynamic mobility of economic power. The system has to be engineered so that wealth must circulate broadly, freely, benefiting the largest number of people. All the time.
So if we manage to do that, if we unbind that power and let it flow, what's the outcome? What's the optimistic, futuristic vision?
The sources are very clear and very optimistic on this. By preventing the binding of power, that dynamism strengthens and enlivens the entire social structure.
It's like getting the blood flowing again.
Exactly. When wealth, knowledge, and opportunity are engineered to circulate, the collective society gains strength, vitality, resilience. It's the difference between a swamp where resources pool and create corruption and poverty, and a healthy river where resources constantly regenerate and nourish the whole ecosystem.
That's the foundation for justice and happiness.
It is.
But, and this is the big but, history shows us that capitalism is incredibly resilient. It's a chameleon. You block one path, it just finds another.
And that's the critical historical narrative we have to get into. The sources stress this. We've been fighting the same exploitative impulse for centuries, but it keeps putting on new disguises. The exploitative class, the Vayaya, or capitalists as they're called.
They've used a whole timeline of methods to keep control.
Let's walk through that evolution, the disguises. Where does it start?
It starts with the most ancient forms, like feudalism. That system bound labor directly to the land. You got physical protection, but in exchange for total economic bondage.
Okay, the society's modernized a bit.
And it transitions to laissez-faire capitalism. Here, the bindings shift. They're not legal requirements anymore. They're purely financial. It's a huge shift toward impersonal economic control.
And then as the world gets smaller, the markets get bigger.
And so does the exploitation. This leads directly to imperialism and colonialism. These were systems designed for one thing: to drain resources and raw materials from huge territories directly to the economic centers of a few powerful nations.
Pure extraction. Pure extraction. And this is where we see the adaptability really accelerate. Because as the colonies started gaining, nominal political independence,
The system didn't just vanish.
it evolved. It evolved into neocolonialism. This is a crucial modern form. The control isn't maintained by armies anymore.
It's through debt.
Debt traps, restrictive trade agreements, controlling key technologies. It ensures that economic power remains bound to the global centers, even when local governments look like they're in charge.
After that, the sources mentioned the mixed economy. That was supposed to be the solution, right? a middle ground?
It was presented that way, yes.
Okay.
The state would regulate capital. But what often happened was the state ended up just facilitating massive corporate power through subsidies, bailouts, preferential policies.
So it became a partnership in exploitation in a way.
In many cases, yes. And that brings us to the final, ultimate, modern phase of this physical exploitation.
The multinational corporations, the MNCs.
These massive entities, they transcend national borders. Their sheer size, their legal complexity, it makes it almost impossible for individual countries to regulate them.
They can just play countries off against each other.
Always seeking the lowest common denominator for labor, for taxes, for environmental regulations.
And the sources drive home a really stark warning here, one that kind of challenges a lot of traditional progressive thinking.
It does.
They point out that even systems that were designed specifically to be weapons against capitalism, like communism, have been rendered ineffective. They haven't stopped the overall exploitative drive.
And again, this is not a political statement for or against. It's an empirical one. It's an observation that no singular, purely economic countermeasure, no matter how radical, has managed to stop the adaptive nature of exploitation.
The system just waits it out
Or
corrupts it from within.
it does. And that failure highlights exactly why fighting only on the physical level is an incomplete strategy. The moment you think you've secured the economic border, the system just shifts its focus to the next, subtler, and, as we said, equally dangerous front.
The mental battlefield.
The middle battlefield, the theft of the mind.
Okay, this is where, for me, the analysis gets really fascinating and, frankly, a bit frightening. When we talk about mental exploitation, we're dealing with intellectual capitalism.
Yeah.
And you said it before, but it's worth repeating. This is fundamentally not about money. It's about the deliberate hoarding of wisdom.
And the active sabotage of collective consciousness. That's an excellent way to put it.
So where does this control focus?
It focuses intensely on the role and often the failure of educated intellectuals.
The people with the knowledge.
Very people with the knowledge. They have the engine for social progress, the ability to design better systems, but they lack what the sources call the natural desire to use it for collective welfare.
So knowledge becomes another form of private property, a tool for segregation and privilege.
Exactly. This is the privilege trap. The highly privileged intellectual elite, the experts, the top scientists, the specialized consultants, they're often just unwilling to sacrifice their personal comforts, their status, for the sake of the public.
Their knowledge goes to the highest bidder.
Not to the greatest need. And this selfish mentality, this intellectual inertia, that's the origin point of intellectual capitalism. It's a vicious cycle. Wisdom is hoarded through patents, proprietary tech, complex academic jargon.
And ultimately weaponized against the development of the masses.
Precisely.
Let's break down the consequences. The source lists 4 key societal problems that come directly from this. What's the first one?
The first is basic, but it's profound. Mass illiteracy. A huge part of the population is either unschooled or just lacks the developed literacy and analytical skills you need for self-governance.
If you can't understand the system, you can't change it.
You remain intellectually dependent. Second, consciousness itself is suppressed.
What does that mean exactly?
The socioeconomic consciousness of the average person is actively discouraged. Instead of teaching kids critical thinking about power structures, the education system often just prioritizes vocational skills and compliance.
Creating good workers, not good citizens.
Good workers who serve the existing economic dependencies. Then, the third point is really insidious. It explains mass complacency. It's the induction of psychic weakness.
Wow.
Yeah. Unhealthy inferiority complexes, the feeling that I'm not smart enough for this, and intense fear complexes are intentionally induced. This keeps the public psychologically weak, paralyzed.
A public that's afraid and feels incapable is never going to organize for fundamental change.
Never. And finally, the fourth consequence is moral and social fragmentation. When you hinder intellectual and moral development, you get widespread intellectual backwardness and deep systemic irrationality.
And that fosters what the sources call destructive narrow sentiments.
Yes, 2 types. Geosentiment, which is loyalty to a tiny piece of land, a narrow national identity over the concept of humanity.
My country, right or wrong.
Basically. And sociosentiment, which is loyalty to a narrow group, a caste, a sect, a political tribe.
And these are the opposite of universal humanism.
The very antithesis.
Yeah.
And this is where the system wins. If the masses are busy fighting each other over identity politics, their energy is diverted. They're not challenging the real exploiters.
So this intellectual stagnation, this collective mental paralysis, it's not a bug, it's a feature. It's a strategic opportunity that wealthy capitalists actively exploit.
They do. They use this intellectual vacuum to weave their web, subtly sucking the life force out of society.
And the method is, well, it's simple. They just buy the intellectuals.
The sources stated that clearly. Capitalists strategically purchase intellectuals with money and use these bought-off thinkers and innovators as weapons in their economic planning.
And in the age of AI, this is happening at warp speed.
It's everywhere. The most brilliant engineers and ethicists are hired to optimize algorithms for maximum profit extraction, maximum behavioral manipulation, maximum attention capture.
Not for collective welfare.
Not for ethical enlightenment. The knowledge is serving capital, not consciousness.
Which brings us to what the sources call the latest, most lethal and all-consuming form of control.
Psychoeconomic exploitation.
Modern warfare against the mind.
It is. And the mental paralysis has to come first. It's a prerequisite. You have to weaken and paralyze the public mentally before the economic exploitation can even begin.
Let's go through the 8 methods they outline. Because this feels like a checklist for modern social control. What's number 1?
Number 1 is cultural suppression. Undermining local languages, indigenous cultures. If you control the cultural narrative, you control identity, you control historical memory.
Resistance becomes harder. Number 2.
The widespread propagation of pseudoculture.
What's that?
The source mentions pornographic literature specifically, but we can extend that to any form of superficial, highly addictive digital content that just drains time and attention.
And destroys the moral vitality of young people.
It functions as a strategic distraction and a moral corrosive. It ensures the next generation lacks the ethical foundation to challenge the status quo.
Method 3 is about gender.
Yes, gender dependency. Imposing restrictions on women, forcing them into economic dependency. If you limit the agency of half the population, you cripple the entire society's ability to demand justice.
4 is education.
A flawed education system, one that's constantly subject to political and commercial interference. Instead of creating critical thinkers, it's tailored to create compliant workers for short-term economic goals.
Okay. Number 5 is about spirituality, or the lack of it.
It's the spreading of irreligion, or the negation of dharma in the name of secularism. And we have to be clear here, dharma doesn't mean religious dogma.
It's more like a universal moral compass.
Exactly. One's inherent moral duty. When you negate that, society is left adrift, unable to even agree on a universal concept of good.
And without that, you can't organize around shared ethical principles.
Right, which leads to number 6, societal balkanization.
Divide and conquer.
Deliberately dividing society into numerous castes, groups, political tribes, whatever, using narrow identity politics to fragment and weaken it. Exploitation thrives on fragmentation. Unity is its greatest enemy.
Number 7 is a bit complex. It's about birth control.
Yes, damaging birth control. The critique is specifically about unnatural and harmful methods, suggesting that population control, when pursued without deep ethical or psychological consideration, just becomes another form of external control over private, fundamental human choices.
Okay. And finally, number 8, which feels more relevant than ever.
Media control. Capitalist ownership and influence over mass media. Newspapers, radio, TV, and today, the huge digital platforms and social media algorithms.
The information flow is weaponized.
Completely. It ensures the narratives that reach the public reinforce the existing structures, normalize inequality, and suppress dissent.
When you lay all 8 out like that, it's a synergistic attack. They all work together.
They form a strategic attack on the human mind to create that paralyzed, fearful, divided populace that's required for this psychoeconomic exploitation to continue.
Which is why the sources say that both intellectual and psychoeconomic exploitation are great dangers.
You cannot have an ethical economic revolution if the collective mind is already poisoned, divided, and afraid. The battle for justice is first and foremost a battle for the integrity of the human intellect.
Okay, that diagnosis is intense, but it points us directly toward the solution. It's time to pivot to the optimistic side. If the crisis is intellectual manipulation, the solution has to be accelerated mental liberation.
Exactly. The need is immediate. The sources say we have to generate a powerful popular sentiment, a broad consensus, and active energy to speed up the liberation of the intellect.
It's a cultural shift.
It is, prioritizing critical thinking and collective welfare over just material stuff.
But that shift needs leadership, and specifically from the people who hold the knowledge right now. So what does the source say intellectuals need to do?
It lays out 3 really powerful requisites for them to transform from passive observers into real engines of change.
What's the first one?
The first one is foundational. It's an internal revolution. It's called intellectual purity.
Intellectual purity.
Intellectuals must first keep their own intellects pure and unblemished. This means shedding the corruption of self-interest, discarding personal prejudices, and resisting the allure of that easy money from exploitative sources.
You can't lead a liberation movement if your own mind is compromised by the system you're fighting.
You cannot.
Yeah.
The second requisite demands a physical, verifiable change. It's active engagement.
Get out of the ivory tower.
Exactly. Abandon all forms of inactivity and prejudice. Mix with the common people. Engage directly in their welfare. Knowledge has to become boots-on-the-ground activism.
And the third requirement?
Direct, unwavering political and social action. Full support for justice.
So it's not enough to just write a critique.
Not at all. You have to actively join the struggle to dismantle the system, lending your intellectual capital, your skills, your moral standing to the cause of the masses.
So if these 3 steps are taken, purity, engagement, and support, the sources paint a picture of a profound transformation of society.
The consequences are comprehensive. First, they say exploitation will be destroyed, root and branch. Second, the social structure will be strengthened, making it resilient. And third, and maybe most importantly, the intellectual standard of the public will be elevated.
A society of highly conscious, critical thinkers is basically ungovernable by exploiters.
That's the idea. And the ultimate result, human society will rapidly move toward a glorious, bright future. This is the realization that systemic change is inherently linked to moral and intellectual upliftment.
You need a rational, highly conscious, and morally anchored public to sustain a just economic structure, especially now.
Absolutely. Think about the ethical challenges of AI governance. If the intellectuals designing these systems are corrupted by profit motive, that's a lack of purity. If they refuse to engage with public consequences, that's a lack of engagement.
Yeah.
And if they fail to support regulations for universal ethical access, a lack of support.
Then the AI systems they create will just become the most powerful weapons of psychoeconomic exploitation ever devised.
Without a doubt. So the liberation of the intellect is, you could argue, the most urgent task of our time.
Okay, so we've covered the physical chains and the mental battlefield. Now we have to ascend to that third, most subtle, and maybe most profound layer, spiritual capitalism.
Yes, exploitation in the sphere of self-knowledge and realization, the deepest core of our existence.
And you said this one is challenging because it often masquerades as virtue.
It does. It's not about corrupt, organized religion. It's about a deeply rooted, personal selfishness that leads to the hoarding of inner power. The sources give it a specific name, Prajabhumi capitalism.
The capitalism of transcendental wisdom, how does that actually manifest?
It refers to those individuals who pursue rigorous spiritual practice in isolation. Think of severe asceticism, deep meditation in a cave somewhere.
While neglecting family and society.
Exactly. And doing it solely out of a desire for personal liberation, for their own salvation. So-called liberation, as the source puts it.
And this is defined as spiritual miserliness.
That's the term.
Yeah.
The hoarding of one's spiritual experience or power. They accumulate this vast internal spiritual wealth, but they refuse to invest it back into the world.
They just don't feel the need to awaken spiritual consciousness in the collective.
No. Their focus is solely Atma Moksha, self-liberation.
Yeah.
But they're forgetting the crucial, mandatory second half of the foundational spiritual policy that this philosophy champions.
Which is, let's state it clearly, at Moksha Artha Jagat Hitayacha.
That is the guiding star.
What does it mean?
It is the absolute cornerstone of a true universalistic spirituality. It means self-realization for the sake of serving the world.
Oh, it's a dual action.
It's a dual action. You must refine your inner self, but the resulting pure and powerful consciousness must then be applied externally to reduce the sorrows and distress of the world.
Mm-hmm.
If you only do the first part, you become a spiritual miser.
This connects so directly to the modern wellness industry, doesn't it? The hyper-individualism.
It really does.
We see this massive growth in meditation apps, yoga retreats, self-help gurus, and it's all focused on personal optimization, my happiness, my peace, often completely divorced from any obligation to address systemic injustice. Is that a modern form of spiritual miserliness?
I think that's precisely the modern challenge. If your spiritual power is only used to make you feel calmer while the world is on fire, then that spiritual power has been hoarded. It's been capitalized.
And that actually arrests your own progress, too.
It does. It arrests not just societal progress, but the ultimate evolution of the self, because the self is inherently connected to the collective.
Because if you see yourself as separate from the suffering of the world, you're fundamentally misunderstanding reality, according to this philosophy.
Yes. True spiritualism demands a universal vision. It demands seeing everything, and the quote is from a sister to a blade of grass as expressions of the Supreme Being.
Oneness.
This universalistic spirituality, this quality of seeing oneness, is the essential characteristic. If you genuinely see the suffering of others as part of your own being, you cannot possibly hoard your wisdom or your capacity to serve.
So without that applied service, that universal vision, the sources say you can't attain the highest truth. Your own path gets blocked.
Spiritual hoarding is just as crippling to your own ultimate fulfillment as economic hoarding is to society's health. And if that's the highest form of exploitation, then the solution has to be a revival of a fundamental human morality that integrates the inner and outer worlds.
This is what the sources call the call of the age.
The greatest necessity today is to revive and reestablish these lost, fundamental human moral principles. Every human has the birthright to engage in true spiritual practice, but that practice comes with a responsibility to apply it.
And that application has to be scientific and rational.
Yes, the sources demand that. A scientific and rational perspective has to be applied to every social sphere. Social, economic, political, spiritual. Morality can't be based on blind faith or dogma. It has to be based on rational understanding and universal compassion.
And it's the lack of this foundational applied morality that creates all the chaos and disorganization we see in the world.
When that fundamental principle of self-realization through service is lost, society loses its direction entirely. And that opens the door for exploitation at all three levels.
Okay. So we've defined the crisis. We have bound economic power, a paralyzed collective intellect, and hoarded spiritual energy. We know the solution requires economic dynamism, intellectual purity, and applied spirituality. So what? Who leads this? What specific leadership structure can guide this massive, multidimensional overhaul?
The progressive necessity, the sources say, is an acute need for a spiritual and all-encompassing movement. And it has to be led by ideal individuals.
This is where the concept of the Sid vapor comes in.
Yes. This term defines the kind of leadership that's necessary for a successful, holistic social revolution.
So let's define that ideal leader. What is a Sid vapor?
They have to possess two absolute non-negotiable qualities.
Mm-hmm.
First, they must be reinforced by spiritual power. They have to have done the internal work. They must have that inner purity and realization that comes from true practice.
Okay, so they're spiritually grounded.
Deeply. And second, they must be rigidly established in morality. They are ethical exemplars, not just knowledgeable experts or charismatic figures. Their morality has to be unshakable and universal.
So Sid vapor isn't just a spiritual person focused inward, and not just an intellectual activist focused outward.
It's the synthesis of both.
A blend, anchored in unwavering practical morality. They are the synthesis of all three liberated spheres.
Precisely. The sources describe them as the all-virtuous, ideal individuals who, in all ages and all countries, will naturally keep the flow of social progress dynamic. Their role is to be the guardians of that collective human dynamic.
To make sure society never again succumbs to stagnation, physical, mental, or spiritual.
The very stagnation that leads to exploitation.
That vision is incredibly optimistic and proactive, a leadership that's fundamentally moral and spiritually driven. It's such a powerful contrast to the purely commercially or politically driven leadership we see so often.
And it's so necessary now, with how fast technology is evolving. Moral frameworks are the essential infrastructure for governing things like AI.
Absolutely. So this leads to the ultimate call to action, and it's not just for these few ideal leaders.
No, it's addressed to all sincere spiritual people. The mandate is clear. They must voluntarily engage in the great work of lessening the sorrows and distress of the world by disseminating their knowledge among everyone. That spiritual wealth, that intellectual insight, it has to flow freely. And if it does, economic and mental liberation will follow.
And the result of this profound engagement, the sources end with the really powerful rallying cry for the future.
It is. The result is total societal transformation. This process will usher in a new era of thought. It will activate the dormant spiritual power in humanity, transforming selfish individualism into universal service.
And it will equip the new generation.
You'll equip the new generation with a courageous, forward-looking new vision. And this new generation, armed with economic dynamism, intellectual clarity, and applied spiritual purpose, will move forward victoriously.
Building a world where justice and happiness are fundamental birthrights.
That's the vision?
That truly is the definition of a progressive, optimistic, and deeply futuristic path. It's a total overhaul, a tripartite movement designed to make the world a better place for all, with a sustainable, ethical mindset. It requires all of us to become active participants.
It does.
So we started this deep dive with something familiar, physical exploitation, the binding of wealth. And we moved into the subtle, systemic mechanisms of mental control and spiritual hoarding. The proudest view is so clear. The crisis is three-dimensional, so the solution has to be too. We can't just protest the economy. We have to purify our minds, reject that intellectual inertia, and insist that our spiritual practice actually serves the world.
The time for single-issue activism, it's really over. The complexity of the modern world demands a holistic, three-part solution.
And the progressive message is that the future isn't about tinkering with old, failing structures.
No. Not mixed economies, not failed communist regimes. It's about fundamentally establishing a universal morality, liberating our collective intellect with pure and engaged leadership, and applying spiritual knowledge for the maximum collective benefit.
It's a move beyond materialism.
It's an acknowledgement of the dignity and interconnectedness of the human mind and spirit.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, trying to navigate this complex world?
I think the realization is that true liberation doesn't just start in the economic realm, demanding higher wages or fairer taxes, as important as that is.
It also begins with purifying our own intellect, refusing to be drawn into those narrow sentiments and that societal balkanization, and actively demanding leaders who embody morality and applied spirituality.
We have to stop just hoping for change.
And start becoming the active, moral, intelligent citizens required to build and sustain a just and happy society.
To better understand these neo-humanist views and the proudest analysis, which, champions a sustainable moral ethical mindset to achieve universal harmony, we really encourage you to subscribe to the Sajipras Movement YouTube channel.
Right. This deep dive has really only scratched the surface. That resource offers a much deeper study.
It does.
And if you want to take this knowledge and turn it into applied insight, you can join a Prout study circle for deeper exploration. Understanding Prout is about taking personal and collective responsibility for that glorious, bright future we've been talking about.
The path to a victorious new generation, it starts with action, with engagement, and with purity today.
Thank you so much for joining us on this really essential deep dive into the tripartite nature of exploitation and the progressive path toward freedom.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
We'll see you next time.